Hey everybody and welcome. We are so excited for our YouTube Live today, but before we get to chatting with Adam, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Matt, I'm the Client Success Manager here at Whitehouse Custom Color. Few things to keep in mind before we get into our broadcast today. If you haven't subscribed to our YouTube, make sure and hit that button. You're going to get notified of all these fun live events that we're doing. There's tons of content on there to check out, so make sure and hit that subscribe button. Follow along on Instagram at Whcc Pro, and then for all product details that you want to know about, sizing, surfaces, framing, all the fun things, check out Whcc.com. And a reminder too, whether you're watching this live today or the recording, if you do have questions, make sure and put those into the chat. We will answer them live today if you put them in while you're tuning in. If it's after the fact, we know how to find Adam and we'll track him down and get the answers to the questions. So without further ado, thank you for being with us. We're so honored to have you here with us today, Adam.
Thank you for having me, Matt.
Absolutely.
It's good to be here.
So would you mind doing a little bit of an intro and background on yourself? You know, for those of you that are out there watching along, you know, we had the opportunity to hang out with Adam in Nashville and learned a lot about you. So would you mind sharing some of your story with our watchers today?
Absolutely. So my name is Adam Stagner. I'm 31 years old, photographer, born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee. I've been doing photography for 12 years now, and it hasn't always been landscape photography, portraits, weddings, toured with bands, all that sort of thing. But you know, I found my niche in landscape photography. I currently live in Hermitage, so I'm still in the Nashville area. Live with my girlfriend Hannah. Hi Hannah, if you're watching. And our two dogs, Moo and Kazuto. And yeah, so I mean, we love to hike, we love to travel. I grew up playing golf, so I'm a golfer. I love to play golf. That's a little bit about me and what I do. I currently own a gallery in Franklin, Tennessee. I started this back in 2021, and we've been going strong and growing ever since.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that when you are in a social setting and people are talking about their careers and you say, oh, I'm a landscape photographer, I would assume that one of the questions that inevitably comes up is, let's talk about your locations. Let's find out like the fun places that you like to go and some of that stuff. So tell us a little bit about how you're finding some of these spots, because that, you know, for me as a portrait photographer for my career, you know, looking at the images behind us and your website and Instagram, you go to these phenomenal places, and to just even know what to look for to begin with, I would think would be a challenge. So how do you begin that process?
Well, growing up in Tennessee, you know, the Smoky Mountains are our back door, our backyard at least, and you know, it's a 3.5, 4 hour drive from Middle Tennessee to get out to the Smokies. So having, you know, one of the most well-known state parks in our state and having access to that pretty easily definitely opens up for those really, really unique locations.
Yep.
I got my start with landscape photography standing at the base of Burgess Falls in Sparta, Tennessee. And most of these waterfalls, what people don't realize around the Tennessee area are very accessible for maybe just a 1.5 mile, 2.5 mile hike. And so it doesn't take this, you know, big backpacking trip to get out and see these beautiful locations. A lot of it's just hopping in your car for a day, making a drive, and going out there and just making a, you know, a little effort of a hike to get to these beautiful locations. Yeah. As far as finding them, you know, we have Google now, so you search you search beautiful waterfalls in the state of Tennessee, and you're bound to find some things that'll come up, and it's up to you to make the time to go do that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Now, before we went live today, you were talking about one of these locations that you traveled in to photograph, and it was a 4-day hike.
So Supai.
Now that's dedication. You know?
Well, not to mention the 8 years that I waited to be able to get that reservation to go. It's called Supai, for those of you that do or don't know about this. It's an Indian reservation on the northwestern rim of the Grand Canyon. And unfortunately, it's very difficult to get into because there are so many people trying to get out there and access this location. And I think the last time I looked, they allow 300 people per day throughout the entire year. So in the grand scheme of things, that's really not a lot of people that are getting to access this. So when they opened it up for reservations on February 1st, up until 2017, they had one landline that you could call through to be able to get through to see if you could book this reservation. And I never got through.
Gosh.
I would wait every year on that date, call, never get through, and then would try throughout the year to see if I could even just get through then, and never could. So in 2017, they implemented an online reservation system, and I waited up all night. And within the first 5 minutes, because I was trying to book this with a couple of friends of mine as well, and nobody gave me their dates, couldn't lock it in, within 5 minutes it booked up for the entire year. So I waited another year. 2018, this was my lucky year, my breakthrough, but I also chose and decided not to go with anybody. I did this as a solo mission, solo hike, and I ended up getting 1 day booked. And I freaked out because you book 1 day, and I spent about $200 and something for the reservation and all that. But you've got to book your flight, you've got to book a rental car, and then you've got to make the drive from Phoenix all the way up to the edge of Utah and Arizona. So it's quite, I don't remember how many miles that is, but it's a lengthy drive. It's a 5-hour drive, I believe. And then you've got to hike, and the hike to this location, and why they don't allow, day hikes aren't permitted, and why it's so hard to access. It's 12.5 miles, I believe, just to get to the campgrounds. I think it's about 9.5 to get to the village. And you're doing this all in 1 day, and you're going to stay out there more than 1 day, so you're taking enough gear that you're going to have some weight with you.
Right,
and then as a photographer, and as all of you probably are, you're carrying camera equipment, and that just adds to the load and makes it even more difficult.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
In grand total, I ended up doing about 40.4 miles in 4 days with 30 pounds on my back, and my right knee's never been the same since, but it was well worth it. It was absolutely worth it.
It's always a trade-off. Yeah, exactly. So since you mentioned equipment, let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Because for me and for a lot of people watching along today, our portrait photographers maybe are interested in getting into environmental or landscape. Tell us a little bit about your equipment. I noticed when you came out of the airport last night, you had your tripod, and you said you carry it with you all the time. So just tell us about that a little bit.
So I've really made do with probably the bare minimum of, like, I guess when it comes to the newest and greatest technology that's out there. I mean, most of my portfolio was built with the Canon 6D. That's the cheapest full-frame camera body that Canon offered. But I paired it with all L-series lenses. So the L-series glass, just with a full-frame body, and like I said, the cheapest full-frame body that they offered. Built a portfolio that allowed me to end up buying now what I have is the 5D SR, and it's an older camera as well. Doesn't have all the bells and whistles of all the new stuff, but it's 50.1 megapixels, and when we're getting into these large format printing, it makes a big difference.
Yeah, definitely. So you're traveling pretty light then when you're
correct.
You're doing
yeah, no generators for most of the portrait photographers out there. You're probably carrying portable generators, batteries, lighting, all that stuff. And no, I mean, I think that's really why I went to the landscape photography side of things.
Yeah, in a lot of conferences, I'll see portrait photographers walking with the wagon behind
mad
them.
respect.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a lot of stuff.
It is. It is.
Exactly. So for those of you that might be just joining us here today, before we get too much further, if you do have questions for Adam, make sure and put them into the chat. We can get those answered along the way here today. And if you're watching the rewind or the record on this, put them in then too. We know how to find this guy to get them answered. So let's talk about the images and compositing. Are you doing any composite work? Like what percentage of your images that you're showing in your gallery have had a fair amount of Photoshop or post work done to them?
I think it would be great to start off with explaining my background. And when it came to photo editing, I worked for an in-house production team where we did retouching and color corrections for two of the biggest companies in the world. And so of course I've over 12,000 hours in Photoshop, and I consider myself to be a master at this point. And it's funny, when people walk into the gallery, they always ask, "Oh, these have to be Photoshopped," and it's like, well, everything at this point, if you're getting something ready for print, it's going to be Photoshop. Yeah. But when we're talking compositry, yes, as far as our cameras, while they've gotten really good as far as dynamic range is concerned, when you're shooting certain things during the daytime or whatever the lighting may be, you're going to need to do multiple exposures and bracketing. And a bracketing exposure is technically a composite of multiple images. And so I do a lot of that when it comes to my landscape photography, absolutely.
Okay, cool. So one thing that I learned last night when we were chatting at dinner and after we picked you up from the airport is this image that I'm going to bring up. And I didn't realize the nature of this image until we were chatting. So I'm just going to put this gorgeous image that Adam created up here on the table. And before we get into the description of it, I know people are going to want to know what this is. So this is actually our fine art metallic paper that we print on here at White House. It's framed in an aged metallic champagne float frame. And this is a 10 by 20 size, but you can do all different sizes. So from there, I'm going to let you explain a little bit more about this image.
Okay, yeah. So this is definitely out of the norm for me as a photographer. I've never been good at painting. I could never put pen to paper and draw. It just wasn't something that I ever was able to do. With the digital art and using a stylus and doing all the things that I did in Photoshop, it got me interested on the digital painting side of things. And then now that we have reached this point with AI technology, you can start creating paintings through simply words. They're called prompts, and through a series of words that are your description, what you want it to be as far as broken down to color palettes, to the subject matter, to the size, your aspect ratio, all these things. When you figure out how to write these out, you're taking all the knowledge and experiences that you've had as an artist, whether it be drawing, painting, doing photography, and you're writing that into words to where you're now basically collaborating with AI, artificial intelligence. And so this is completely made through artificial intelligence with a combination of Photoshop, Illustrator, and InDesign to do certain tweaks and different things like that.
Yeah, and the reason that I found out about this image is you had done an email blast because this particular image is on display where in Nashville?
It's at Geodis Park in the Soundwaves Gallery. This is the Nashville Soccer Club's new stadium that just got put up in Nashville. Yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah,
well, it's gorgeous.
I was honored, yes.
Yeah, it's beautiful, and the way that this paper works with the image itself is just fantastic. So, yeah. All right, so I know as a portrait photographer for years and years and years, when you are photographing, you're looking through the camera, you're looking at the screen in the back, and sometimes you look at an image, you're like, oh, that is just fantastic, when it's this big, and you get it on the screen later and you're like, but then there's these other ones that are like, in camera, you're like, okay, that's fine, but then when you get them on the screen, you're like, oh, that's the one. Now, is there something similar when you're out photographing, you're like, oh, this is gonna be the perfect location, all the things, it feels right, and after the fact, you're like, oh. or vice versa. Have you experienced that?
Both, absolutely. And I hope to experience the other one, the happy. This is it. This is my moment. This is the shot. But I love that you bring that up because there had been so many times, especially earlier on in my career and when I was just getting into landscape photography, that just looking at the back of that LCD, it's not going to give you the true nature of what your clarity, sharpness, and if you missed focus or anything like that. Sure, you can zoom in and you can check all that, but when you bring it in on the screen at home, that's when you typically see, okay, I missed this by a small fraction or things like that. When I'm out, 9 times out of 10 now, even if I think that I got the shot that's going to work, I take another one just to be safe, and I might adjust those settings just a little bit, just to have something a variation of that at that point. Yeah.
And I would think that after a 4-day hike in, that would be a good thing.
That's a necessity at that point. You're not hiking 40.4 miles and not taking multiple shots to make sure that you got what you needed.
And another thing that I thought was interesting this morning when you got to the lab, you and Christina were chatting, and she asked you about the number of images that you come back from a location with, and I really enjoyed your answer because I think as portrait photographers, we tend to be overshooters, and we, as in we right here on this end of the table, was definitely in that camp. But you said, I want to come back with as few as possible because you're going to these locations, and I'm sure it can be overwhelming. Can you talk to us about, like, is that something that has developed over time with you? Because I would think that to begin with, it'd be like, oh my gosh, this is beautiful, gorgeous. I'm just gonna like and we're going to take 8 million pictures of one thing. So how did that develop in you over time? Because that's a patience thing. That's learned.
Doing file management. I mean, it's as simple as when you do a lot of file management. In my background, I had a job where I did that as well. But even if we're working for ourselves, we do file management all the time. So keeping that number as small as possible is always going to save you time. It also, I think, it helps with making your selections. I think we as artists, we tend to be perfectionists. And
what?
Yeah. I don't know if that's a newsflash, but we tend to be perfectionists. So the more you have, the more you're going to constantly debate whether or not just this slight little change from this one to this one. And I'm all about saving time, doing things efficiently, and I just know that when I cut that down, it saved me time in the long run as well. And I wasn't sitting here debating, well, maybe this one's a little better than this one, and that and the other. So yeah,
definitely.
That answers the question.
Oh, definitely, because there's things that you should be doing with your time, and there's things that you shouldn't be doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's probably one of them. So when we chatted a few weeks ago, leading up to your visit here today, I thought you had a really interesting perspective on what you are kind of quote unquote sacrificing right now for the eventual lifestyle that you want to have. And that's why we titled this what we did today, For the Love of Lifestyle, because you really are making that trade-off. And one thing that you said is you talked about labor freedom. So can you explain that a little bit to our listeners today of some of that trade-off that you're making right now and how you define labor freedom? Yeah,
well, I guess I can start by saying, 7 days a week, and I'm trying to do much better this year to give myself some more time off out of that gallery. But essentially, I have a 150 square foot gallery that's in the Cool Springs Mall in Franklin, Tennessee. And I don't have any employees, it's just me. And so I'm selling art prints every day. If I don't show up to the gallery, unless somebody takes a card or scans a QR code, more than likely a sale's not being made that day, so no revenue's being brought in for the business. Mm-hmm. I have learned that I've got to sacrifice that to give myself the mental health days that I need and time, and also to go shoot. Forgive me, I kind of got off track a little bit.
So your trade-off with the hours that you're putting in now to eventually create the lifestyle that you want, eventually.
So I'm sacrificing, and it was last year, the first year in business, 7 days a week. I maybe got 30 days off last year to where I wasn't in that gallery. Mm-hmm. And in my mind, I was doing that for other companies that I worked for, but I also didn't feel appreciated at those jobs that I was doing. Mm-hmm. So I said, well, if I'm going to do this, I might as well do it for myself. Right. And once I got to the point where I had the confidence and the capital to go out and start this business, mm-hmm. I said, well, you know what? I've already done it for other people.
Right.
If I can show up for them, mm-hmm. then I better be able to show up for myself. And I knew I could at that point because I'd already done it. So it's more satisfying, and I feel less of a, we were talking about, the labor, what I specifically, labor freedom. Yeah, mm-hmm. so essentially not being a slave to that, and for somebody else. I'm a slave to myself, but I'd rather it be that way.
And to create, freedom for what you really want to do.
The goal is
later.
to do all of this now, mm-hmm. so that eventually I can go and do this 24/7. Yeah. We're getting to a point where everything can be done remotely now. I mean, most people are now working from home where they weren't before, just from when we went through the pandemic. So, the goal would be to be able to make art sales online, do custom printing, also do photo restoration work through any digital things on the road while I'm traveling and building the portfolio even bigger every year.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the goal.
So in order for you to be able to do that,
yep.
and for printing, there has to be products that come with that. So let's talk a little bit about what you were focusing on in your gallery. Now, I know the answer to that, but they may not. So tell us about, we're not going to get into the gallery space just quite yet. We'll get that in just a couple minutes.
Okay.
But let's talk about your products now. Yeah. So what is your main focus of what you're showcasing in this space?
Metal prints.
Yep.
The metal prints have been something that, And I think it is because of where that price point has always been for metal, that it doesn't show up all the time. So when people come across it, especially like at a trade show or like me being in a mall, it's something that they're not seeing all the time. Canvas is one of those things that's so popular that anywhere you go, canvas is found. They'll stop and they'll look, but it's not as awe-striking as it is for the metal prints.
Yep.
The metal prints bring our images to life in more detail, more color depth than you could ever get from any other medium, and people notice it. Whether they know exactly why they're looking at it that way is another thing, but it does grab people's attention, and it's been one of my favorite mediums to print on to bring my own images to life. I enjoy looking at it that way. So,
definitely. And kind of a cool thing too, for those of you following along today, like we said, Adam flew in last night. We actually have one of your prints ready, and you're going to see one of your images being pressed.
Super stoked about this.
So you really can see the process. It's really fun. I kind of joke around and say it's a science experiment, because it really is. You know how, and for those of you that haven't seen a metal print in person, 6 different surfaces available. The color and the contrast is just phenomenal.
It is.
So I'm really excited to have you see that. Now, as you're listening along to Adam, knowing that he has a successful business, taking something he loves, his passion, and creating a living from it, he's not just sitting still. You have your gallery, you are looking at a second location, which we'll talk about in just a second, but you're also, like when we were doing the tour of this building, you're like, I really want to talk about other products, other things that I can work in. So tell us a little bit about your goals, like for this year. I know that there may be some things changing as far as locations and auditions and all those things. Talk to us about like what your growth chart is for this coming year.
Yeah, and it'd be a good thing to start with, like even where I started just in 2021 compared to where I've grown to now, and where I started with a certain product line. So when I launched this gallery, I was sold on metal prints, and I just wanted to sell metal prints. What I quickly realized is that wasn't going to grow the business. Implementing more materials and more print mediums, while it's been more for me to do, to have different materials and go so forth and so on, and how to display those, it's given me more revenue because I'm offering more products to those customers. Somebody that comes in that loves an image and it's on the metal, maybe their budget's just not simply for metal, but they want it. If you don't have something there that you can offer them, then you've just missed out on something at that point.
Definitely.
So the growth that I've experienced so far has definitely, the key factor has been adding more products. It's having something for everyone, and that's kind of the goal that I'm trying to reach now. It's as many things that I personally like to display my artwork on, but also I'm listening to my customers. And the feedback from customers will help you grow your own business faster than anything else will, I tell you that.
Definitely. And for those of you that have, heard other White House events on YouTube before, I preach about that. Having things available and keeping track of what those requests are, not just trying to go from memory. Oh, I think I heard, this many that were interested in acrylic blocks, or this many that were interested in this, or on the flip side of that, this many that didn't care for this particular thing. Keep a chart. Keep a tablet or something and document that.
That gets broken down all the way even to the images, like as far as if there's any landscape photographers watching this and you're wanting to know like what it is to be able to sell those pieces. You've got to listen to what those customers are wanting those images printed on, and then specifically if you're selling, let's say, for example, this image here is just something that somebody's always purchasing. You keep a note of that image is the one that sells a lot, so this is the one that I want to have on display. And so that's huge. Yeah,
and it's an attention grabber.
It is.
Maybe that's not the one that they will eventually end up with, but it gets
grabbed their attention to begin with, and that's important.
Yeah, it begins the conversation.
It does.
So speaking of sales, I think that you kind of kicked that door open so we can walk into that room.
Cool. I didn't.
So from a portrait perspective, we talk a lot on YouTube and with our client base about, the way to sell portrait photography and the sales presentation. What you're doing is 180 degrees different. it's not their family member.
Right,
It's a location.
they got the plus on that side. You've got you've got somebody that is already attached because they're in the pictures. So to sell something to somebody that has nothing to do with them other than maybe an experience at a location that they've had, which I will tell you that is key.
Yeah.
People that have been to the same places that you're photographing and you write a story that can entice them, it's huge.
Yeah,
so
definitely. Yeah, and you were saying last night, and I 100% agree with this, people fall in love with the story. And
Absolutely.
I think that you mentioned, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were saying a lot of the AI artwork that you're creating is selling on the website. But the images that have you attached to them, in the story of them and the conversation, that's what you're selling in person.
It is.
And to me, that's awesome to hear that, because with portrait photography as well, it's about the whole experience. When somebody's investing in you and your images, that's part of that experience.
It is.
They want to know about the 4 days. They want to know you walked 40 miles, to get the image and the ups, downs, and sideways of that whole adventure.
There's value in that. There's
Absolutely
so much
there is.
value in that.
Absolutely. So explain to us, when you are talking with somebody and you are watching them fall in love with this image, how does that feel, and how do you know, like, yes, this is going to be a good one? This person is somebody who respects what I do, who's willing to invest in it. Like, that has to be pretty awesome.
It is a wonderful feeling. It's been one of the most satisfying and gratifying feelings through doing landscape photography, especially spending years doing it and only getting hearts and likes on Facebook and Instagram and the couple of comments here and there. And like, people would even say, oh, I'd love to have a print of this, but never buy a print of it.
Yeah.
It has been a game changer to have a physical gallery and have people that walk in. And how I know when somebody's genuinely interested is they will typically, it's not the, oh, well, you must have a nice camera. It's
which you probably hear too.
all the time. But those are typically not the ones that buy from me. It's
Right.
the people that go, hey, who took this photograph? And if somebody asks who took the photograph, they're interested in the story of that photograph and how it came to be. And it's so great for me to be there and be the person to introduce myself as the person that took the photograph.
Yeah.
And it's when I see the light up in their eyes when they realize that, oh wow, you're the artist, like you're the person that took this photograph.
Yeah.
That's how I know I have a genuinely interested customer at that point.
Definitely.
And then it just goes to discussing and seeing if they've been to that location and
Yeah.
building that rapport with them. It's now, while yes, you're selling your art and yourself as the art and tying yourself to it and all of that, truly how to build that customer relation is getting to know them and why they are attracted to it and what draws them to that piece and what it means to them, because generally people are going to buy artwork that they relate to.
Yeah.
So there's something that they relate to about it that's going to cause them to buy. Yeah.
Definitely. And it's not sales at that point. It's being invested
It's just
in the relationship.
having a conversation like you and I are now about
Yeah.
something that's passionate. Like we were both passionate about that location that we traveled to, whatever we did to get there. And then and it's funny, there are a lot of people that have a passion for photography, and when I asked, I was like, oh, do you do photography as well? And they're like, well, just a hobby. And it's like, well, no, you're a photographer too.
Yeah.
You don't have to be doing what I'm doing to be considered a photographer.
Yeah.
And then we bond over that, and then they still end up being a customer at the end of the day, and it's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we're going to roll a few of the images that you sent us today.
Okay.
And as long as those are going, I would like you to talk to us about some of your favorite locations that you've been before.
Well, the one that just popped up, Greeter Falls. I don't know if you can go. Can you go back to that?
It's actually going to come up again here.
Okay. The first one of the fall scene with the waterfall. That's actually where my girlfriend's name's Hannah. I know she's still watching, but that's where we confirmed our relationship, and I asked her to be my girlfriend, so that's a special spot for us. And it's beautiful during the fall time. This is out in Altamont, Tennessee, so it's south heading towards Chattanooga, near the Suwannee River area. Just one of my absolute favorite waterfalls in Tennessee. Is there another one that I think I saw McWay Falls up there? Yep. So this is McWay Falls. I'm sure if anybody's doing travel and landscape photography or have ever been down the Coastal 101, you have gone through Big Sur and got to experience this amazing waterfall. This is where, it's one of 2 coastal waterfalls on the West Coast where freshwater meets saltwater.
Oh, cool.
So it's a really unique spot.
That's awesome.
Antelope Canyon, this is probably my most popular piece that I sell in the gallery, and it is the one that, like you said, grabs people's attention and brings them in.
I can understand why.
Yeah, so that's in Page, Arizona. You go up to see Horseshoe Bend, and you've got the slot canyons to check out as well. And this is my beautiful city that I'm born and raised in, and it does not look anything like it did in 1991 when I was born. It has grown quite a bit. This image was actually photographed during the pandemic, and throughout my years as doing photography, I've taken the shot from the pedestrian bridge at least 20, 30 times. But there was something special about this evening, and I actually just went down to go photograph Bridgestone Arena to get a shot of the Preds Sam. Huge Preds fan, let's go Preds. And wanted to get the stadium with nobody in front of it. And so the only way to do that was when we were in lockdown and had no cars driving through. Okay. So as I was walking back to my car, I noticed that the clouds were rolling in. And so I went ahead and I said, you know what, let's just go over to the pedestrian bridge and see if we can get this shot. Yeah. And so sure enough, I set everything up. And what I later found out, these purples and magentas that you see in this, while yes, everything has been color corrected, but this is pretty natural to what we saw that day.
Beautiful.
And the reason that we got so much purple and magenta, apparently carbon emissions play a huge part in the hues that we see in our sunsets and sunrises. And so because we were in lockdown for 2 months and had much less carbon emissions that were being produced, it's one of the most unique sunsets that I'd ever seen over our skyline.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And this is Toketee Falls, and you had mentioned compositry earlier. This is consisting of about 72 images.
Wow, 72?
72, yes. And there's a little light painting involved on this, and then the Milky Way is actually from the same trip, so it was a day prior, and I was out at a location where I was able to get that really beautiful shot of the Milky Way, and when I did this light painting scene for this shot, there was no Milky Way that night, so I couldn't get that in there. If it would have showed up, I would have been able to do it all in once. But because it didn't, and I just had a black sky, I figured, well, you know what, this is going to just tie this whole image together. And this is when compositry makes beautiful imagery.
Yeah, that's just phenomenal.
Thank you.
Those are awesome.
And this is, I'm sorry, I didn't even, it was Toketee Falls. That's out in Oregon. That's the Umpqua National Forest.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then this one?
Yeah, this is, so I joined, when I left my production job doing, in-house retouching and color correcting, I jumped ship and hopped on a cruise ship for 5 months. And I was in Cuba for about 3.5 months. We were circling Cuba, so I went to Cienfuegos, Santiago, and Havana. And this is in Cienfuegos here. This is an old Studebaker in front of, I believe this is a college of some sort. And then did a film noir edit on this where we do the color pop and that Sin City feel. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But it was incredible out there.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So let's go back to talking a little bit about your sales here.
Okay.
So I'm very interested in that, and I think our viewers today are interested as well. I'm just going to assume that they are. They get to be. So as you are watching the light, like you described, coming out in their eyes, and they're connecting and you're having this good conversation, how are you closing that sale? Are you, like if somebody says, I love this 40 by 60 that you have hanging here, do you take it off the wall, package it, send it with them? Or are you drop shipping, or are you doing a hybrid? Like, tell us about that.
I love the drop shipping. That is much easier for me and much easier for my clients. And they love the drop shipping as well because they know at that point it hasn't been touched, it hasn't been hanging. It's a brand new print that's coming straight from the presses and to their door.
Yep.
So I always try to close with dropship. But like you asked me, how am I closing some of these sales? Well, sometimes if they are interested in a specific one, let's say I had the 40 by 60 on the wall and they said, yeah, how much is this one? Well, first, you don't want to start with price. You can, but I like to say, well, do you have a place in mind for something like this? Just to gauge whether or not they're serious about buying, because there will be people that will walk up all day and say, how much is this? You tell them the price, and then they just walk away. Yep. So, I've had to learn and figure out how to curve around that. And so typically when they ask me a question like price, my immediate answer is, well, they all vary by size and material. is this the specific one that you're interested in getting today? And if so, would you want to take it off the wall? And so now I've answered their question, but I've also replied with a series of questions to get to know exactly what they're looking to do and whether or not they're a serious buyer that day.
Right.
And let's say they are. And they ask, well, you know, I don't have a way to get this home, or they do have a way to take it home with them today. The incentive at that point being that it has been hanging in the gallery and I've touched it, cleaned it, other people have, it's okay, well, I can offer you this one at a discounted rate from this gallery if you want to take it home with you today, or we could do it for this price for the drop ship. What that does, that adds incentive to close the sale right then and there, because typically 9 times out of 10, if you don't close it then and you're not doing a credit card transaction swipe, you will not see that person ever again. It's just, it's how it works. I would say I've started to learn how to overcome this, and now I'd say that number's changed to maybe 7 out of 10. But that all comes down to building relationships with people and making it less about the money and the sale and getting the art sold, and just simply having a conversation like you and I are doing right now that's genuine and authentic, and people relate to that.
So let's talk about your gallery space.
Sure.
And we have a few images to show everybody today that you sent us. So describe your space, size, where it's located, all that stuff.
Yeah, I'm hoping to have a bigger one day, but right now it's a 150 square feet gallery. I'm by an escalator in the mall, which is great because I've got a pottery barn that I'm right next to. Okay. So everybody that's coming down to this pottery barn for home decor, well, now you've got another series of home decor that's outside of the pottery barn. But because we're so close to the Apple store too, this is a very, very high foot traffic area for that type, for our clientele, for the clientele that I want. So yeah, this is 150 square feet space in the mall. We built it, well, my good friend David Tardy, shout out to David for building this for me back in 2021. It has moved from Green Hills Mall to Cool Springs Mall, and when I tell you that those 15-foot walls are about 500 pounds a piece, it is a pain in the butt to move them. Not shout out to you for not or shout out to you again, but in a negative sense, for not making those lighter, bud. But yeah, it has been great. It's sturdy, solid. Nobody's coming up and just knocking it down. It's been great to put the metal prints on display. And I went with white to keep it a nice, clean gallery look. I know a lot of people like to go black with these galleries as well. I chose white. And it stands out. I think it just stands out of everything, and where black just absorbs all the light and wouldn't pop the way that this white does. So that's why we went with white.
Yeah, it looks awesome. And then tell us about your new endeavor, your new spot that you're going into.
Yeah, currently, so there's Poly Studios Consignment Gallery in Nashville. It's in the Marathon Music Works building. This is where the American Pickers Association, they're located as well. There's Greenbrier Distillery. I know there's some breweries in there, wineries, but this is a very, it's an old building that has been developed and modernized today, and a lot of foot traffic over there, and I'm very excited to be over in that building as well.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So tell us about your next travel. Where are you heading? Have you listened to anybody say enough times, oh, do you have anything from this location? Are you planning
Everybody's
any
begging
trips?
me for Aurora Lights in Iceland. Everybody is begging me, and I'm begging myself to get over there as well. Yeah, no, that's definitely probably my major bucket list goal right now. But if I can't make it there first, I definitely plan. I think my next big trip will be up to Banff. I'd like to go up to Canada, and I'm a big hockey fan, so I'd like to catch me a real Canadian hockey game, and head over to Moraine Lake, Lake Louise, go to Banff and explore all that. I think that'll be the next place that I go. Yeah. And in that, I'll probably go through Glacier. You got to understand, when I take these trips, I cram a lot in a very short amount of time because I haven't had a lot of time to be able to do this sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Even now, the portfolio that I have, a lot of people go, oh, you've traveled quite a bit, and I'm like, quite a bit in a very short amount of time. I was maybe, granted 14 to 20 days a year for the last 10 years to be able to build this, and some of these trips I did, my longest trip yet I covered almost 8,000 miles in a matter of 11 days, and that was from Nashville to the went from Nashville to Flagstaff, from Flagstaff up to Supai, which is that Indian reservation that I was referring to, but we ended up not making the hike then because you can't do a day hike in. So we actually lost a day of travel and location time to go there. Drove from there to LA, went from LA all the way up the PCH as far north as Monterey and Carmel, and then we came back down all the way far south as San Bernardino, over to Joshua Tree, back up to Page, Arizona, and then back to Tennessee, and all that was in 11 days.
Wow. So it's just all glamorous.
Oh, yeah. So gutted the back seats out of the CRV. I built a bed frame back there, and we rough it, man.
Yeah.
If I have a buddy that goes with me, it's great. It's always a fun trip, and I do have a few photographer and videographer friends that have gone with me over the years. And shout out to y'all for making those drives and keeping me awake when I needed to be awake to drive. So it's been wonderful.
Yeah, that's
it's been
awesome.
an adventure.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that all comes back to our conversation, and where the title of this live came from is you're doing the things now. You're working hard. You're putting in the time. You're paying your dues, so to speak. So that in the future you can
get back to doing that.
Yeah, you can relax a little bit more, and you're building this wonderful product-based business, which is essential.
Yep.
And you have the space, where people can come and see things, in person. It's not just all online, so it's really fun, and I admire your drive, to really go get it. So for people that are watching along today, where can they find you online? Like, let's have your website, your Instagram, all those things.
I'm so bad about social media, and I try to be as good as I can be. But Instagram's probably the main platform that I would definitely say on the social media side of things. I do have an Etsy. I've got my website that I keep up with. But StagnerImages.com for my website. Stagner Images is my Instagram handle as well. And those would be my main platforms where you could find me and ask any questions if you had any.
Awesome, very cool. Well, we really appreciate you guys hanging out with us today, and Adam, you're an inspiration. It's so fun to chat with you, and we're so excited to have you here. Just a reminder, if you're watching along with the recording and you have questions, make sure and put them into the chat. We'll get them answered for you as quick as we can. Make sure to hit that subscribe button for the WHCC YouTube so you get notified of fun events like this that are coming up. Follow along on Instagram at WHCC Pro, and for any questions that you may have about products and sizing and finishes and all the things, go to WHCC.com to check that out. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Adam, for being with us and hanging out with us today. We're excited to show you how the metal process works.
I'm excited to see it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you at the next one.